Let's open with a word of prayer. Gracious God, we are still in the season of the empty tomb. Help us to see the world event shape our lives even 2,000 years later. Enrich your word that it may come to life in us and give us direction. In Jesus' name we pray. Amen. Okay, today's chapters are pretty straightforward. If this computer cooperates with me, we almost had, we did have World War awards before in this morning. It came up in the middle, everything was set to go. I started to walk away, and something flashed on the screen. It says, the computer needs to restart so it can finish installing your graphics card. I thought, that's not good. And it took 45 minutes later for it to reboot. And so we finally, I didn't know if it would. Right before service, I saw the screen come up. So hopefully it's going to cooperate today. So we have been on this, looking at these missionary journeys of Paul. And we're sort of wrapping up already his third journey as he heads back toward Jerusalem to where the headquarters of the church is. And if you remember last time, we talked about he's doing these farewell speeches to people, and likely that he realizes he probably will never see them eye to eye again, and they didn't have Skype or FaceTime to kind of keep in touch visually after that, so only the letters and so forth, and so it is sort of a emotional time for him. And so now we pick up on chapter 21, and we're going to move into him heading back toward the Jerusalem. So if somebody wouldn't mind reading the first, let's see here. Let's go. At least let's go to 16 if somebody wouldn't mind tackling that much. 1 through 16, 21. All right.
When we had parted from them and set sail, we came by a straight course to Kos, and the next day to Rhodes, and from there to Patara. When we found a ship bound for Phoenicia, we went on board and set sail. We came in sight of Cyprus, and leaving it on our left, which I think is really interesting in detail, leaving it on our left, we sailed to Syria and landed at Tyre, because the ship was to unload its cargo there. We looked at the disciples and stayed there for 7 days. Through the Spirit, they told Paul not to go on to Jerusalem. When our days there were ended, we left and proceeded on our journey, and all of them, with wives and children, escorted us out of the city. There we knelt down on the beach and prayed, and said farewell to one another. Then we went on board the ship, and they returned home. When we had finished the voyage from Tyre, we arrived at Ptolemais, and we greeted the believers and stayed with them for 1 day. The next day we left and came to Caesarea, and we went into the house of Philip the Evangelist, one of the 7, and stayed with him. He had 4 unmarried daughters who had the gift of prophecy. While we were staying there for several days, a prophet named Agabus came down from Judea. He came to us and took Paul's belt, bound his own feet and hands with it, and said, "Thus says the Holy Spirit, this is the way the Jews in Jerusalem will bind the man who owns this belt and will hand him over to the Gentiles." When we heard this, we and the people there urged him not to go to Jerusalem. Then Paul answered, "What are you doing, weeping and breaking my heart? For I am ready not only to be bound, but even to die in Jerusalem for the name of the Lord Jesus." Since he would not be persuaded, we remained silent except to say, "The Lord's will be done." After these days we got ready and started to go up to Jerusalem. Some of the disciples from Caesarea also came along and brought us to the house of Mnason, of Cyprus, an early disciple, with whom we were to stay.
All right. So, again, to look at our map, you kind of see where we are in this journey. He set sail, and that dotted line is the return trip along the coast there in Turkey, and all those spots, that you mentioned the comment, leaving it on our left. There could be some sense of, if you go inward, there, it's going to take a little bit longer, but you're also going to be near coast if anything goes wrong. So when you go that way, it's a little more direct, but also a little bit more precarious in the sense that you're not as close to the land except for the island of Cyprus there. So they go sort of directly. Remember, initially, Paul, last time we talked about, said he didn't want to stay long because he wanted to get Jerusalem for Pentecost. So they have this direct route, but then they sort of make it there. There's time to spare. And after a day in Tyre, they go down and then they actually stay there in Caesarea for a little bit of time. So Paul knows now that he's going to be able to make it because they're on land at this point and they would know that trip. So before they leave, some folks are worried about Paul. Don't go to Jerusalem. There's going to be trouble there for you. It says that when our days there were ended, remember, Luke is still, we believe, traveling with him. All of them, wives and children. It's just sort of a reminder, again, that this is not just a collection of male from households and the families are doing this thing. No, this has always been an embodiment of entire households. When we hear a household being baptized or they stayed in that house, these are families, wives and children, he even mentions here. This is a movement of all people of all ages, and they say farewell to them and they move forward. When they get to Caesarea, they go to the house of Philip the Evangelist. Now, if you remember, Philip, when we got to those deacons very early on in the book of Acts, those 7, Philip was one of those that were named along with Stephen. And Stephen and Philip are the ones we hear the most about. Philip was the one that went down with the eunuch and all that took place. And Stephen, of course, was the one who was martyred. So interesting, this group of 7, the deacons, they are appointed, set aside, anointed, and then one of the major ones is martyred, and who's standing there holding the cloaks while he happens is the Apostle Paul. Well, lo and behold, now here's that same man staying in the house of Philip the Evangelist. Okay, little change of perspective through probably Philip and Paul as well. Now, if you want to marry off your daughters, don't give them the gift of prophecy, apparently, because he has 4 daughters, none of which are married, but they all have the gift of prophecy. We don't know really what to make of this kind of thing, but he's staying there. While they are there, it's interesting. Why does Luke feel the need to include that? I don't know why that little tidbit's thrown in there. It's just, okay. But then we have this prophet Agabus come down. Now, Agabus we'd heard about once before. Agabus also was a Jewish prophet who became a believer, and he was mentioned in the early chapters. He was the one who said there was going to be a famine back in Jerusalem area, and it was the people that outside the area that started to collect food to give to them because Agabus said this was going to happen. So here is somebody that sort of predicted something that came true as we think of it in that light, and he sort of does so again, and he doesn't do so with just words. He puts on the whole play, doesn't he? He dramatizes, gets Paul's belt and just, binds him and says, this is what it's going to look like, Paul, if you go there. And so the rest of the believers are going like, hey, Paul, Agabus got a pretty good reputation here. We heard this back too. People are worried about this. Word's coming back. Jerusalem is not your safe place to go. And we kind of get this response from Paul that's very interesting. He says, 13, what are you doing, weeping and breaking my heart? And then what? For I am ready. So is this a sense a little bit that Paul is tired? Is he feel like he's been on this mission for a while? He's been beat up, he's been jailed, he's been threatened constantly, that he's either so hardened to that fact that his life's at risk, or he's at the same time like, if this is the end, I'm okay with it. I have finished the race, And so but he's okay with it. So he will not be persuaded. And so the folks say, well, the Lord's will be done. They kind of throw up their hands and like, we've tried to stop them from going, but we do not have a good feeling about this. And so after a few... Oh, certainly. This whole sense about going to Jerusalem, yeah, that's a good point in terms of we've heard this along the way. Luke has written about this in the previous book about Jesus setting his sights on Jerusalem and going, and people are going, oh, you shouldn't go back there, and he's going. This is, yes, not very much so reminiscent of the journey of Christ to go to Jerusalem. Paul's going there as well. And then we have this reference to that they go to the house of Manason, a Cyprus, and basically early disciple with whom they were able to stay. Some say that this person, there's very scant information on him, but he was a friend of Barnabas, because remember Barnabas being from that area as well. So that being true or not, we really don't know. So now we get Paul back in Jerusalem after he's been on these journeys, and we hear now the rest of the story. Let's look at 17 through 26, if somebody wouldn't mind tackling that. Thank you. Thank you. Okay, so you rise, the brothers, that's the disciples now, are in Jerusalem, and they go to visit the head of the Jerusalem church, and this is James. Now remember, the disciple James, John's brother, had been already martyred. Remember, he was killed early on. This is James, the brother of Jesus, okay, who plays very prominently in the early church in Jerusalem. He is basically the head of that, and the elders were present. So we have this sort of church in Jerusalem, sort of the, unnamed headquarters, if you will. Antioch was a pretty special place, but Jerusalem is still where everything happened. We get a highlight that this is the church leaders coming together. We get a sense that there's elders. There's some structure here that's starting to happen, and so they're all present. James is there, and Paul then comes and relates the things that he has done in terms of their mission trips and ministry. And what is the reaction, 20? When they heard it, they praised God. All right? They welcome his work. They are accepting of what he has done. They who were probably a little bit skeptical of the one who had persecuted them certainly has demonstrated 20-fold that he is up on their side, that he is a believer in Christ, and the zeal that he has. And then they said, well, this is a good thing because, your reputation around here has been kind of subject to a lot of rumors. We need to remember that Paul was a Pharisee. Paul was in Jerusalem. He knows these people. He knows who's against him. These are the people that he served on the church council with them, okay? He knows who these people are. And they've heard, like, he's went off the deep end, and he's doing this and that, and, rumors start, and all. He's telling people, forget about Moses, and we know that's not a fair account of that, but, and to not practice circumcision or other traditions and all these kinds of things that sort of take root. And so they're stirred, they're upset. And so the advice of the elders of the church is, look, you're going to be seeing these people. You're going to need to address them. Why don't you do something that sort of proves that you still are a Jewish man, that you still connect with these people? So they advise him to join them and go through the rite of purification. So the sense of being prepared before God and all this stuff, the purification before making a sacrifice. And Paul says, definitely, I can do that. That's no problem. And so he goes through this rite, and he goes through that. And then let's see what happens. Let's read 27 through 40. Thank you.
And when the 7 days were almost completed, the Jews from Asia who had seen him in the temple stirred up the whole crowd. They seized him, shouting, "Fellow Israelites, help! This is the man who is teaching everyone everywhere against our people, our law, and this place. More than that, he has actually brought Greeks into the temple and has defiled this holy place." For they had previously seen the Ephesian with him in the city, and they supposed that Paul had brought him into the temple. Then all the city was aroused, and the people rushed together. They seized Paul and dragged him out of the temple, and immediately the doors were shut. While they were trying to kill him, word came to the tribune of the cohort that all Jerusalem was in an uproar. Immediately he took soldiers and centurions and ran down to them. When they saw the tribune and the soldiers, they stopped beating Paul. Then the tribune came, arrested him, and ordered him to be bound with 2 chains. He inquired who he was and what he had done. Some in the crowd shouted one thing, some another. And as he could not learn the facts because of the uproar, he ordered him to be brought into the barracks. When Paul came to the steps, the violence of the mob was so great that he had to be carried by the soldiers. The crowd that followed kept shouting, "Away with him."
Thank you.
You want me to read?
Yeah, go ahead and read through the end of the chapter. It's going to end weird, but...
To be brought into the barracks, he said to the tribune, "May I say something to you?" The tribune replied, "Do you know Greek? Then you are not the Egyptian who was recently stirred up a revolt and led the 4,000 assassins out into the wilderness?" Paul replied, "I am a Jew from Tarsus in Cilicia and a citizen of an important city. I beg you, let me speak to the people." When he had given him permission, Paul stood on the steps and motioned to the people for silence. And when there was a great hush, he addressed them in the Hebrew language.
And so here is one of these things where sometimes you wonder how in the world chapters are divided, but it ends with saying, "Oh, that's enough. Next chapter." And so it's always, you're curious about some of these chapter divisions that they made. But, okay, so here we have Paul. He's back. He's doing his purification. But meantime, as people made the trek into Jerusalem, the come visit the temple in the holy city, there's some people that go, "That's the guy that came into our town and stirred up a whole mess." And they start recognizing them, and they start saying, "Look, if you don't want this, now this is the temple. This is more than just the synagogue. This is the big place, and he's going to do it again. He's done all this stuff before, so let's," he gets going, "let's get him." And so, again, people They start with the rumor. He's bringing Gentiles in here. He's going to bring them into the Jewish part. I just know it because we seen him with a Jewish or a Greek guy yesterday. He probably went in there, And they don't even. It's just like it's just that whole sense of half-truths and stirring up people. And guess what? People are stirred. It's not hard to do. We know that. And the city was roused. They all rushed together, and they kick him out of the temple. They shut the doors behind him. But again, when there's a disturbance in Jerusalem, what's going to happen is the Romans are going to get involved. And remember, there's Antonio's Mount, and if we looked at the map of the temple, Herod had built this thing right outside the temple that was higher than the temple walls, so that the Roman guards could stand up there and watch and see what was going on in the temple. So they see this disturbance going. They see the crowd. So guess what? They're going to go down and not let this thing get out of control. So they're beating Paul outside the gate, and lo and behold, here comes a cohort of the Roman guards, and they stop. And so they come down and they grab Paul, and they arrest him, bind him in 2 chains, it says, and inquired who he was and what he had done. And the crowds are yelling everything. Oh, all this stuff, this mob sense gets going. We talked about, the mob mentality a little bit last time. The violence of the mob is so great that the soldiers have to literally pick him up and take him away. They're all screaming away with him, and they bring him into the barracks where it's safe enough. And they get in there, and you got the leader of the cohort there, and Paul talks to him. Paul speaks to him in Greek. And all of a sudden, the guy does a double take, like, whoa, wait a minute, you're not who I thought you were. I thought they figured they had a protester on their hand. They thought it was this Egyptian who had caused this event. There is record, and I think it's 54 AD that Josephus refers to in Jewish history of an Egyptian leading riots in the cities around the area. So there's outside source material talking about this Egyptian that did this thing. So again, it sort of gives us some historical credence to what's being recorded here, that they think they got the guy, they think it's somebody else, but then when he speaks Greek, they're like, well, this doesn't sound Egyptian to me. And so now he's a little thrown a little bit because he's speaking that. And Paul says, no, hey, look, I'm a Jew. And if you just let me speak to them, I'll calm things down. And the Roman guard sort of like, well, what have I got to lose? They're already out of control. We're already in here. So I will give Paul, I'll let him do it. And so Paul's sort of implying that, I can sort of calm them down. So we then move into chapter 22, and it says, as he addresses them. So let's look at just the real quick of the first 5 verses of this next chapter. Anybody? Thank you.
Brothers and fathers, listen to the defense that I will now make before you. When they heard him addressing them in Hebrew, they became even more quiet. Then he said, I am a Jew born in Tarsus in Cilicia, but brought up in the city at the feet of
Gamaliel, yeah.
Educated strictly according to our ancestral law, being zealous for God, just as all of you are today. I persecuted this way up to the point of death, of binding both men and women and putting them in prison, as the high priest and the whole council of elders can testify about me. From them I also received letters to the brothers of Damascus, and I went there in order to find those who were there to bring them back to Jerusalem for punishment.
Thank you. Okay, so we go into the speech. And so we have the crowd there who are in a frenzy, and again, we talked about some of them, we had it last time, like some of them didn't know why they were there. You have people that just join in and they're moving with the crowd. But so Paul comes, they allow him to appear, and he starts to speak to them in Hebrew. Hebrew is their language, and so they're like, oh, wait a minute, what's going on here? And so they listen to what Paul says. Again, Paul is going to emphasize his Jewishness because of the Jewish crowd here. And so he begins to tell them his story about, like, okay, this is me. I was born a Jew, Tarsus. I was brought up at the feet of Gamaliel, who is, remember, he was the one back when Peter and John were arrested and dragged into the temple because they were preaching about Jesus being alive again. And he finally says, look, let it go. You're making this a bigger deal. If it's something of God, it's going to stick around. If it's something not of God, it's going to die off. Quit making it a bigger deal because you're feeding the flames of the fire of this thing. And people listen. This guy's respected. Now Paul's referring to him and saying, look, that's who was my teacher. That's who I had. So that gives him even more credentials with these people, like, oh, he's under so-and-so. And, you know, we do these with different teachers we've had through the years or something like, or band directors and, you know, all these kinds of things. And, you know, I was under this band director and, you know, people make reference to it and all this kind of stuff. And it sort of gives you some cred, as a street cred, as they would say. I saw something that was posted on Facebook, I think it was, Nancy Cartwright, who is the voice of Bart Simpson. She's an Ohioan, and she's from Kettering. And she, just saw this yesterday, I think, and she gave a message to the current high school band in Kettering, where she herself was in the high school band. And she said that one of their traditions was they would march to the stadium chanting something. Boy, I can't remember what they chanted, ready for the show or something like that. And she said it was during her senior year that some of the band changed the mantra to "eat my shorts." And they still do that to this day. And so she said, the funny thing is, though, she said, I remembered that. And she said, in an ad-lib moment when we were recording The Simpsons, I had Bart say, "eat my shorts," and she does it in his voice. And she said, and it caught on, and that became his tagline. And she was saying to the Kettering High School band, so now you know the rest of the story, that when you do that, that's where that came from. Or it impacted me and impacted the whole world, they said, with the Cartwright. So she was congratulating the band. And I thought, that's kind of cool, but there's a little bit of a tidbit of a story. But now because she's aligned with one of them, the people, oh, you know, and we all sort of do that. We do it with pastors. We do it with all kinds, you know, like, oh, you know, so, you know. And so Paul's putting this out there. And so that does give him, you know, people are listening to what he's saying. And so that's important here as he has this audience. But then Paul goes on to talk about his story, his conversion, his experience from this. This is the most detailed that that Luke gives of Paul's conversion. And in this time, not surprisingly, what type of things do you think he's going to emphasize? But the Jewishness of it. Why? Because he knows if he's up in Corinth, he's going to highlight different things about the story. Here, he's going to highlight the Jewish history to do that. So let's look at 6 through 16. If somebody would read that. Thank you.
While I was on my way and approaching Damascus about noon, the great light from heaven suddenly shone about me. I fell to the ground and heard a voice saying to me, "Saul, Saul, why are you persecuting me?" I answered, "Who are you, Lord?" Then he said to me, "I am Jesus of Nazareth, whom you are persecuting." Now those who were with me saw the light, but did not hear the voice of the one who was speaking to me. I asked, "What am I to do, Lord?" The Lord said to me, "Get up and go to Damascus. There you will be told everything that has been assigned to you to do." Since I could not see because of the brightness of that light, those who were with me took my hand and led me to Damascus. A certain Ananias beside me, he said, Brother Saul, regain your sight. In that very hour I regained my sight and saw him. Then he said, the God of our ancestors has chosen you to know his will, to see the righteous one and to hear his own voice. For you will be this witness to all the world of what you have seen and heard. And now, why do you delay? Get up, be baptized, and have your sins washed away, calling on his name.
Thank you. So here we have this story that we know. When we think about the Apostle Paul, this famous story, he talks out, but doesn't notice he says, I don't hear a voice saying to me, Paul, Paul, because remember his name is still Saul, Saul at this point. Saul is a very Jewish name. The first king of the United Israel Kingdom is Saul. But here he brings into this fact that it is Jesus of Nazareth, whom Paul's saying, look, I persecuted him. And he's going to go on and talk a little bit about that. So he explains this thing that happens, that he goes on to Ananias in Damascus, because why was he heading there? He was going to get more of these people following the way, these very people that he is now a member of. So let's go ahead and just finish out this chapter, 17 through 30. Thank you.
After I had returned to Jerusalem, and while I was praying in the temple, I fell into a trance and saw Jesus saying to me, hurry and get out of Jerusalem quickly, because they will not accept your testimony about me. And I said, Lord, they themselves know that every synagogue I imprisoned and beat those who believed in you. And while the blood of your witness Stephen was shed, I myself was standing by, approving and keeping the coats of those who killed him. Then he said to me, go, for I will send you far away to the Gentiles. Up to this point, they listened to him, but then they shouted, away with such a fellow from the earth, for he should not be allowed to live. And while they were shouting, throwing off their cloaks and tossing dust into the air, the tribune directed that he was to be brought into the barracks and ordered him to be examined by flogging and to find out the reason for this outcry against him. But when they had tied him up with thongs, Paul said to the centurion who was standing by, is it legal for you to flog a Roman citizen who is uncondemned? When the centurion heard that, he went to the tribune and said to him, what are you about to do? This man is a Roman citizen. The tribune came and asked Paul, tell me, are you a Roman citizen? And he said, yes. The tribune answered, it cost me a large sum of money to get my citizenship. Paul said, but I was born a citizen. Immediately those who were about to examine him drew back from him, and the tribune also was afraid, for he realized that Paul was a Roman citizen and that he had bound him. Since he wanted to find out what Paul was accused of by the Jews, the next day he released him and ordered the chief priests and the entire council to meet. He brought Paul down and had him stand before them.
All right, so here we are, and he continues to speak to them. 17, after he returned to Jerusalem, it says, he is told by God to get out because he's already in every synagogue. He's sort of, right now, at this point, he's seen as about to be bad one way or the other. Okay, he's fire frying pan here because he's persecuted the Christians who now he's going to go to, and now he's been part of the people that are persecuting. But if he goes and tells them that, hey, I'm not going to persecute anymore because they're right, that's not going to go over well. So he gets out. He leaves. He mentions here, we have this reiterated, that he himself was an eyewitness to the martyrdom of Stephen. He admit, I was standing there. I watched their coats, to make sure this happened and all that. He says about, I did this to many other, made sure they were bound. He is telling them, I was very much against this. And so he's gone along, they're listening, and then he goes, then he said to me, for I will send you as far away to the Gentiles. And that's the hot button word. Once he says Gentiles, all this other stuff they've heard about Paul comes rushing back into their minds. And it says up to this point they listened to him, but now they shouted, yep, this is what he's about to say now. We don't want to hear this part. And so he shouldn't even be allowed to live. And this is the thing that about, I think, Christianity as a whole, I think human nature in a sense as well. When I think about the Christian life, and we get into these debates, theological reflections, arguments, discords, divides, schisms, whatever, most of the time we can tie it to who's included and who's excluded by painting with a large brush. My sense is the litmus test for me is, without knowing the details of the issue, I'm probably going to line up on the side that welcomes more people. Because biblically, through Jesus' life, through Paul's experience, the apostles, it's what? It's always about those who are saying these people are out, and some say, well, we think these people might be in, and those people who say the circle should be wider get in big trouble. Jesus' message certainly was that, because not only was it for the Jews, it was for people that were unclean Jews. It was for people that were not being the most righteous in the Jewish faith, who were not following the law, who were picking grain on a Sabbath, these Jews that claim to be Jews, and his disciples are among them, and Jesus welcomes them. Well, then it's the Samaritans, for crying out loud, that against us, those Samaritans are blood brothers and sisters, and by gosh, certainly not them. And he's talking to women alone. He don't dress women. And then it's some Gentiles. It's a centurion whose son he heals. All this kind of stuff, and not including this, and this is upsetting the apple cart. Peter and Paul come along. Remember that even at the Samaritan woman, they're like, well, he shouldn't be talking to him. Well, you go tell him. I'm not telling him. You know what I mean? That he shouldn't even be talking to these people. Jesus is always widening the circle. Peter has the experience with Cornelius, the vision on the tent of the animals, the unclean animals, that it's widening once again. Paul becomes a persecutor, converted, and he goes out and to the people that are uncircumcised, and to the ends of the earth. Jerusalem, Samaria, to the ends of the earth. The circle is widening again. And what's happened when people find out the circle is widening? We get mad. We get upset. Put it in modern day issues of sexual orientation, of gender, of race. And it seems to me the common thread is the more we say these people are out and these unless they do that. So by default, I feel like theologically, you're hard-pressed to find me, biblically, a story of which God is acting to exclude, to limit. It seems always about that. And so when I wrestle with issues, and I've journeyed through a lot of the issues of our time too, and been on different spots, and grown and expanded and challenged myself, and still don't understand everything by any stretch. But by default, I think my starting place is going to be about widening the circle of God's kingdom out of default, unless you can prove to me otherwise. And that seems to have guided me. And I feel like when people start saying these people are not, and that's what's upsetting them, I have to go, let me look at the gospel and see if that's going to add up. So I think that becomes, I think of the town I served before I came here was Canal Winchester, which is a suburb, a bedroom community to Columbus. And it was all farms for years, all farms. And in the congregation, long-time family farms, from handed down from at that son to son to son, have on their signs to the farm, Smith Farm since 1812. You know, these are around, you know, and we're members of the church. Well, it's interesting to me, the dynamic that played itself out, because some of the farmers began to sell their land because it was a bedroom community to Columbus, and so new housing developments would go up. And so there was this kind of, these people are moving in. More and more people are moving in. And that didn't always go over well. And it caused certain things that played out in certain ways with certain issues. And I can remember even when I first got there, in the interim, this whole, it's a whole story, I won't go into the whole detail, but I'll just summarize it this, that eventually the interim was replaced by Ken Sauer himself at that time, who was the bishop, to come in interim to get things settled down, and then he handed it to me. And the one issue that was causing this in the congregation was that they wanted to put a bike path in front of the church. And, right. Oh, but let me tell you, the farmers in that congregation were lividly against it. Why? Because they were just going to take the property. And finally it dawned on me, their property had already been taken to put in clover leaves on the interstate. So if they could stop this one, this is where they decided this was going to be. Once I understood that, it helped me understand the culture. But guess what? The new people in the neighborhood, in the congregation, and again, this happened, this is like a week, 2 weeks before I started, because they come in, they're like, we need to let you know this meeting took place at our church here a couple of weeks ago. And this is like after I've been all this stuff, and they said there was a meeting with a property committee to how to stop the bike path, and word got out, and some of the members rode their bikes to the meeting with all their regalia and helmets and came in, and it did not go well. You know what I mean? And so that's what was going on in the congregation already like this, because it was these new people are changing everything. And you can go on and you can get that sense, but what I thought was ironic is that as these new neighborhoods developed, these folks didn't want any more new neighborhoods. They wanted to stop. We need to stop this. It's going to get too crowded here. I moved here for this small community. The high school even has a 13-year club that if you started in kindergarten and graduated, those students were in a club together. You see? In fact, I just saw posted a former parishioner put their daughter, and they had posted, they were standing there, they were in the 13-year club, still going on to this day. That whole sense of that, and what was gone way in too much detail and stuff, but what was great for my daughters, one of the things I liked about it, because we moved into there during their high school year, and they joined a marching band, and I said, it's great because you're not going to be with people that have been together 13 years and now you're the new kid on the block, because there was other new kids joining all the time because of the housing developments going on. So in that sense, it made their assimilation very easy, because the longtime families, while they had kids, they didn't have as much kids as these people in these neighborhoods had. Okay, but you saw this stuff play out. But like I said, so I get, and they even, if you wanted to go sit down at Wigwam's restaurant at the corner downtown, Wigwam's restaurant that has the Barbershop Museum of Ohio on top of it, by the way, you sit in there, you go, because that's where the farmers came for breakfast, and when they took a break, came in there and had coffee. But they called it Winchester, not Canal Winchester, because they remember when the canal was here and it was just Winchester. The canal got added late. You know, this whole mentality. But I said, so you get that mindset, but what was interesting to me was the people that had moved in and been there 5 years also then became on that we don't want any more. We want to stop this. But see, that's our mentality, isn't it, all the time on all kinds of things. And especially when it comes to, when we get into our religion and our spiritual lives, this sense of this is how we are before God, this is how we could be before God, this is how we should be for God. Don't mess with my salt shaker. Don't be spilling it and saying, well, these people too, because that's not part of it. And we can look back in our church history and just in recent times, and see any time when somebody starts to shake the salt shaker or shake the snow globe might be a better example. Snake that, we get all rattled up, and people, we're starting our new denomination then. It's always about, I shouldn't say always, when I start to make those kinds of statements, I don't mean to, because it's not always, but many times, when I look at schisms in the church, we can look at it because they started to include these people. They started to include women. We're starting our own denomination. They started to welcome people of different sexual. We're starting our own. And it just plays out itself again and again and again. And so I find that thread, even back here, when Jews to Gentiles, which is something we don't even think twice about, but it was a major deal. And then we get a flavor of why it was a major deal for all these years. Because look, truth be told, if we look through the Old Testament history and the commands of God to continue to be this people that was overtaken by country after country and force them out, and they able to nurture and keep that identity that they're still speaking Hebrew Aramaic these many centuries later in a Greek-speaking Roman world with Latin and all that stuff, they still could speak that because they held on to that, and Passover was still happening. You can understand that now you're saying, wait a minute, welcome these people? Look what they've done to us. So we get a sense of both sides of this, of how this stuff plays out. And this is why Paul's message then becomes critical. All right, so he has this. So then they bring him in. The Romans get involved, and when that gets involved, that's going to be a bigger deal. The Jewish citizens, back off. They take them back into the barracks, flog them, and then say, let's tie him up, let's whip this guy. And just as about to do that, he says, oh, by the way, do you do this to a Roman citizen who's uncondemned at this point yet? There hasn't been a trial, and it's like, excuse me? What? Oh, we've got trouble. And this sense of citizenship was important. And, I think I was saying, even if I wasn't a Roman citizen, if I was about to be troubled, I'd be like, I'm a Roman citizen. You know what I mean? I think we would probably use, and they would probably, but there's a sense that they know Paul speaks Greek. There's a little bit of sense that this guy might be onto things. And so the centurion goes and tells, hey, this guy's saying he's Roman citizen. He comes in here, are you a Roman citizen? Paul goes, yes. And the tribune's like, well, it cost me a large sum of money because you could pay to become a citizen. But Paul's like, no, from birth. And the guy's like, we are in big trouble. And it says immediately in 29, those who are about to examine, I like the word examine here, those are about to beat and whip him, draw back from him. Like, I never touched the whip. I never touched it. I was never going to do anything. I thought he was innocent. This whole sense of immediately it changes the whole story. And so they go, okay, well, if that's the case, we're going to check this out. They become afraid. I think I've mentioned this before, like being in the Holy Land, the fact that you carry an American passport. And it's one of those things that you feel like when they made the Palestinians get out of the bus when I was on there, and they came back and they made everybody get off the bus. The Jewish military got on the bus, got these big guns, and I'm just like, what are we into now? I mean, my heart's beating 90 miles an hour because they're right there. They're coming on there and everybody off. And John's like, just sit here. And I'm like, no, I'm going to listen. He goes, passports. Because then and we put it, don't move, stay right there. Change in behavior, you guys sit down right there. Don't you trouble yourselves to get out of the bus. I mean, that's the kind of sense, you get that feeling, that's the way it was. They didn't want to mess with that. They didn't want to do that. And quite honestly, it was like a get out of jail, literally maybe, a get out of jail free card that you had this passport. And when we tried to walk back in from Jordan across the border, the guy came out and said, well, you can't get on that bus. Let me take your passports and see. He took them, and we're like, And this couple, they were from Brooklyn, New York. They said, did they take your passports too? And they had to Brooklyn, so I'm like, they're not kidding. We're from Brooklyn. We've been sitting here 4.5 hours, and they have our passports. I'm just like, we're in big trouble. But it was like 20 minutes later, come out, get our passport, get on the bus, boop. All those kinds of things that happen. So boy, I'll tell you, I kept that passport. I didn't let it close. You were scared to death not to have it. But this is sort of the sense of the Roman citizenship of what it did to the immediate change in that area to these things happening. And so we end this chapter 22 now by them going, I'm going to have find out, do a little bit more investigation about what's going on. I'm going to have the entire Sanhedrin come down here and talk about what is it that you got against this guy. And he brings Paul down to stand before him, and that's where we finish today.
Can we get a little more into the Roman citizenship? How come Paul had it? Did a lot of Jews have it? And how come the soldier didn't have it?
Well, he paid a lot of money for it. I don't know fully an answer to your question. I can tell you that it is sensed that because where Paul grew up, back up in Tarsus, which is more up toward that he by family was probably afforded the opportunity more to be because of where his territory was. Versus down in Jerusalem, which is where the Jewish were, so it would be rare. So I think, and this is, I thought that they said maybe like in that area, it seems to me like maybe 10% had a Roman citizenship, but I am not 100% about that. But you could pay and do this thing that costs a lot of money, obviously. And if you weren't going to travel any place, it's sort of the same thing. It's like, why get a passport if I'm gonna be here all my life? What's in it for me to go through this for that? Anything else? All right, we're going to stop there today. Pick up with chapter 23 next time. Thanks, everybody.